From the Department of Health, University of Otago, Wellington, Professor Michael Baker joins us. Michael, good morning to you.
Morning now, Pat.
Doing well? Life going well?
Yeah.
We have been talking in BHN for weeks now about where are we really at with COVID? Where are we at? Where are we being told we're at? And what should we be doing? This kind of came to a height on last night's show, or ahead, I should say, on last night's show, where we looked at an article, which I'll bring up shortly, but put out by Michael Plank and David Welsh and another colleague of theirs about what the hospitalisation numbers were at the moment versus what the reported cases are. And in my mind, in fact, I might as well bring it up now, I'm sure you've seen it, but just to show other people. In my mind, Michael, seeing Omicron to Omicron, you would expect the same proportion of people to be hospitalised as were hospitalised in the first wave of Omicron. The first wave of Omicron hospitalisations, when they were around about 800, the cases per day being reported were around 14,000. At the moment, the cases being reported are around 7,000-ish. Is it fair to assume that it's about a half underrepresentation of that being reported? Is that a fair assumption to make, that probably the numbers are more, the actual case numbers are probably double to match what it was when there was 800 hospitalisations in March of this year?
Yeah, well, look, I've read their recent paper on this, and I've been tracking these numbers very closely. And obviously, there's lots of different things going on. We think that the cases reported every day by people doing their RAT tests and entering the data are obviously under measurement of cases.
Sure.
And the reality is possibly twice as high, but certainly at least 50% higher than those numbers. There isn't any suggestion that that proportion has changed very much over time. There might be a little bit more fatigue setting in. But what has changed is that the risk of severe disease, which manifests as hospitalization and death, has risen this year. So BA5 or BA4 are having a bigger impact, but just based on the number of cases, but actually the severity of infection. One factor is that the age of cases getting infected has risen. And so while the risk of infection appears is somewhat less at the moment than it was in that first peak, the consequences are worse because of who it's infecting. And so even shifting the age up by, I think it's probably about 10 years, the median age has moved up. I haven't actually got that figure in my head, but that's enough to shift the balance. And all the time we are seeing, if you like, a form of equilibrium between the virus and us. And there's the three partners in that are, of course, the organism, how it's changing, how we're changing, and that's predominantly our immune status. Mm-hmm. And the third thing is the environment. And the environment has both these behavioral and these physical aspects. How are we socializing? In what environments? Are we using masks? Is the ventilation good? So anything that shifts this balance results in case numbers moving up or down. Nothing makes it go away, of course, at the moment, and that's not going to happen, I don't think, with this virus. But at the same time, we're probably not going to see the massive spikes we saw at the start of the year, because we are accumulating more immunity, which is not always a good thing, because it means we're getting sick along the way. We're better to get our immunity from vaccine, of course.
Yeah. Hey, I was wondering how you felt when you saw that photo of Jacinda Ardern maskless with all those young MPs. And subsequently, the week later, we saw Christopher Luxon at in Te Puke, not talking about the Te Puke controversy, but about him going around the factory maskless as well. I've been someone who has been, encouraging mask usage, not on the same level as you, obviously, but from what we do and saying this is the best defense. To see the Prime Minister maskless amongst 150 people kind of, to me, felt like a bit of a punch in the gut, even to someone like me who's kind of saying we should be wearing our masks. And this example that should be up the front chose not to. All the work you've done for over 2 years, how did it feel to you when you saw that photo and the subsequent, I guess, continued non-mask use by other people in the public eye? Luxon, we also saw the All Blacks at the airport. There's a story about them being maskless. What does that do for you? What does it make you feel like?
Well, I mean, it's a missed opportunity, isn't it? One thing is trying to do the best we can. The other is also communicating what is best practice. And I gather, and I actually, when you saw other images of the youth parliament, they were wearing masks when they were there. And I think that's a requirement in the building. I do think in this instance, the photographer said, please take your masks off so we can see your faces. And people, I don't know if you've been in this situation, we're surprisingly obedient when photographers tell us to do things. And you say, sure, I'll take my mask off or whatever. I'll smile. I'll even wave hysterically, whatever. That's what photographers do. And I think that actually genuinely is what happened there.
Right.
But I think it's a missed opportunity when our leaders don't wear masks. And also, I think we all have a strong hypocrisy gauge. We're looking for that. We're looking for, I guess it's that overused word, integrity from our leaders. So
right.
we want you to do what we're doing, not just what we say. And we're going to model good behavior. That can get silly as well, of course. I mean, we do want genuineness in all of this, but it is challenging. I mean, those of us who are advocating for masks, we keep saying it's not perfection. We're not after you to wear a mask when you're in the shower. You've got to be. It's got to be sane, and that is. And I try to wear a good quality mask when I'm indoors with people who are not in my family group. But occasionally, if you're sitting down for dinner with people, you have to take your mask off. Obviously, that would defeat the purpose of having a meal with friends and that kind of thing. So we're not going to be absolutely fanatical about these things. But the thing is that you're in the realm of probability. You're trying to turn the tap down and beat the virus and slow it down. We can't stop it. But if we can turn the tap down 50%, that makes a huge difference. It reduces the number of people getting infected every day, and that in turn reduces those going to hospital and dying. It is as simple as that.
Yeah. Hey, do you have any inside knowledge or any estimation or any understanding about more vaccine rollouts? Like at the moment, there's the over 50s can get the fourth or the double booster, whichever you want to do it. What about those of us in our 40s, those of us who are underneath? Is there any advice coming out shortly as to when others will be eligible for another jab?
Yeah, well, look, it's somewhat arbitrary, the age of providing the booster. I mean, we set it at 50. I think it might be 30 in Australia. It will be different ages in different countries. I think there is an element of need to prioritize, and that's just based on the fact that younger people have, unfortunately, I should say the opposite is your immune system does get senescence like everything else, and so you are just much more vulnerable, and it's almost an exponential increase in risk as you age. So I think it's a pretty sensible targeting at the moment.
But there's no advice as to when the next rollout will come, the next kind of band of people?
No, I haven't heard anything on that. I mean, we've got immunity gaps at the moment. We've got still a third of adults who haven't had their third dose. So that's a big gap, a bigger problem probably than the need to get the fourth dose. We've got only, I think, about a third of children between 5 and 11 have had 2 doses. So there currently are big immunity gaps that with vaccines been there and offered for months and hasn't been taken up by some groups. So that's a problem. I think many older people getting that's our first true booster, I should say, the 4th dose, because with the Omicron variant, you need 3 doses as what we call your primary dose to give you that initial protection. So this is our first true booster for adults, and it's quite likely that we will need a top up maybe every year as we do with flu vaccine.
We talked last night about this article that I brought up before, which I'll bring up again just to show people, and the idea of hybrid immunity. Also, this article talks about immunity for those who have, previously been infected with COVID, and we had a little conversation amongst us morons going, what do they mean exactly by the word immunity in that situation? Because for a long time we've been being careful and being told to be careful not to reference like antibodies that someone has after infection as immunity, because people hear that and they go, ha, I'm a superhero, I'm safe, there's no problems at all. So I'm wondering, can you expand a little bit on first of all, what hybrid immunity. We kind of described it last night, but in case we're completely wrong, can you describe what hybrid immunity is? And then when the article and scientists in general are talking about immunity that comes with having had COVID, that use of the word immunity there, what exactly does it mean?
Yeah, immunity means that your immune system has had some prior exposure to a virus or bacteria or any microorganism, either the wild or natural version of it, or a vaccine, which tries to
Right.
simulate that process. And the end result is that you've got two main components of your immune system: cellular immunity and basically antibody immunity. And they both help. And a good vaccine stimulates both. And all it means is that when you next encounter that, if you're vaccinated, when you next encounter that organism, your body is ready to go and you mount a very swift response. But you still need an intact immune system and a functioning one to do that, whether it's through natural exposure or through immunity induced from vaccine. Hybrid immunity is the idea that you get a broader and deeper and possibly a more long-lived immunity if you're exposed to both vaccine and then the organism. And it could be in either order. You could get exposed or natural immunity, and then you get a top-up from the vaccine, or vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But the suggestion is that does give you probably more complete immunity, because the vaccine targets just one part of the virus, the spike protein, whereas the actually getting exposed to the virus will target more or produce broader based immunity. And at the moment, there's a big effort to develop vaccines that cover not more than just the spike protein, that cover other parts of the virus, so that might protect you from new variants better.
Yeah, that was actually the exact question I was about to ask. Is there word in the community about the next iterations of vaccines? Because, you know, you talk about the flu vaccine, or people often talk about polio. It comes up on my show quite a bit because my dad had polio in 1948. He got it then.
Right.
So I talked last night about how I'm someone who's lived with someone in my life who's got a disability based on a virus. So this is one of my biases, I guess, from this whole thing, and understanding what it can mean for people moving forward to an extreme level, obviously. But you know, people got the polio vaccine and they were kind of clear, done, you know, sorted sort of thing for a good long length of time. Whereas all these variants coming out seem to be finding new ways around the corners of the current vaccine. Is there any word in the community about the next iteration of vaccines that might be a yearly shot that would protect us, or might be a better defense against the whatever the current iteration of the virus is, and future ones as well?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. Well, the new kid on the block, if you like, is the bivalent vaccine that has what's called the ancestral strain in from the original virus that was circulating, and that's what all the vaccines are based on.
Right.
And it also has an Omicron component, so it's called a bivalent vaccine. That's doing well in trials overseas and is being rolled out at the moment as a booster. It may be available late this year or early next year, and that's likely to be more effective. The next generation of vaccines that people are working on are ones that have what's called a conserved region, so it looks at part of the virus that doesn't change with new variants, and that would again give us what's called a pan-coronavirus vaccine that covers everything that nature might throw at us. That's still at a very experimental stage. So I guess that we have to wait. We'll probably have to wait quite a long time for that. The other refinements of vaccines are new ways of delivering them, because what you're after is mucosal immunity, because the virus latches on to receptors on your mucous membranes in your upper airways and sometimes in your lower airways. So the vaccine gives you what's called systemic immunity. That's very good at protecting you from systemic infection. That's infection that gets away from the mucous membranes and starts to infect organs throughout your body, and that can be very serious. So the vaccines are good at protecting you from that, but they're not very good at giving you protection of your mucous membranes. And so an inhaled vaccine would be possibly far more effective.
Okay.
And again, they're progressing well, and I think they'll be in human trials at the moment. So it might be that you have both. You have a initial injection which gives you this full body immunity, and then you have maybe you inhale something from time to time to give you that mucosal protection. And in general, it's quite hard this is why it's hard to stop things like the flu fully. We've never had great vaccines against the flu. They've been relatively good, about 50, 60% effective. The coronavirus vaccines are much more effective, but the virus is also very good at mutating, having these big, what are called sprints in its mutations, and creating whole new branches of the family tree, which have caused a huge amount of grief.
Interesting. Hey, look, thank you for joining us today. One last question, and it's more kind of a what should we be doing question. If we look back to the graph that we started the whole show with, and if, for example, I mean, you said maybe 50%, maybe double the numbers that are being reported. If I look back to when the cases looked similar based on hospitalization, which is back in end of March, beginning of April, it was 14,000-ish cases a day. And I'm thinking to myself, if we had 14,000 cases a day at the moment, if that's what it was, we don't know that, but if that's what it was, the government would be doing something differently, because they were doing something differently when it was 14,000 cases a day. The government has kind of taken their hands off a little bit. That's how it feels from the kind of my side of it, and kind of said, look after yourselves. So the way I'm approaching life, and we're saying to people, is kind of get on with life and wear a mask. Look after yourselves now, because the government's kind of said, we've done our bit, it's up to you now. I know they haven't literally said that, but that's how it feels. What advice can you give us, best practice, best way to stay safe, to not get reinfected, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, if it was indeed accurate that there was, say, 14,000 cases a day in the community as opposed to 7, because 7 feels quite close to that 5,000, which I think David Welsh said would be the, 1,000 cases per million is about the target for plateau. So 7 feels quite close to 5. So you can get the sense of, we're doing really good. If the reality is it's actually 14, the last time it was 14, the government was like, and now they're like, no, sweet ass. So what should we be doing? I feel like I'm on the Muppet Show. What should we be doing in case it is 14 to keep ourselves as safe as we can?
Yeah, and look, the other figure I'm looking at is the mortality rate, which is higher now than it's ever been. And we've just had our most lethal week since the start of the pandemic, where the moving average is up to 38 deaths a day. Now that you need to take 20% out who will be incidental, but it's still over 30 a day. If we run at that rate for the rest of the year, I should say that is 30% of all deaths in New Zealand at the moment are being caused by this infection.
Wow.
And that's quite shocking. It's way ahead now of heart attacks and cancer as a killer on any one day. So that's a number I find very worrying. But it won't carry on at that rate. We will see numbers drop down, but they've never been below 10, a moving average of 10 now since this really early on in Omicron. So just spread over a whole year, that's going to add at least 10% to our mortality rate in New Zealand. So that's 10 times the road toll, and at least 5 times more than die from influenza. So we really don't want the virus wearing us down in that manner and that intensity. So in terms of what we do about it, we're still back to the big 3 things, and I think these are emphasized over and over again. You really have to be vaccinated and boosted, so that if it does 2 things. It slightly reduces your chance of getting infection, but it greatly reduces the consequences of infection. So I just think that's essential. The second thing is, if you are sick, you have to stay at home for at least 7 days, and you are actually still infectious in many cases up to 10 days. So you need to wear a mask for those next few days as well. That's really essential, because that means you're not going out and infecting other people. And the third one is minimizing transmission indoors. And we know what that's about. It's wearing a good fitting respirator type mask. They're very effective. And if everyone's doing it, it's source control. It stops you firing out droplets. And it also gives you some personal protection. And the other thing is, shifting activities to well-ventilated spaces. And I know my colleagues now walk around with these little CO2 meters, and it's actually, you don't need these all the time. I mean, it's a bit of a party trick, pull out your CO2 meter and watch how the levels go up. And we are really intrigued that if you're having a meeting, you have one of these, you're wearing a mask, you have one of these on the desk, and if the CO2 levels go up, you open a door and the levels drop again. And It's just we're all learning more about what does a safe indoor environment look like. And the great thing about ventilation and mask use is you can do everything that you like doing. You can go to music venues, you can do everything, but just have some idea, some consciousness about the environment, the fact that we're rebreathing other people's air. And some people have said that one of the great revolutions of public health was realizing that water transmitted infections and clean water was still the biggest life-saving advance in human history. But one of the second ones was the idea of clean food, not having it contaminated. I think we're looking at another revolution in thinking, and that's about clean indoor air and external air as well. And that may be one of the big legacies of the pandemic.
Hey, thank you, Michael. Just one point of clarity. When you're talking about deaths, 38 deaths a day, because at some stage, how they were recording deaths was changed. Is that considered 38 deaths caused by COVID, or does that include the ones that people die with COVID? Like just for clarity.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. That is a number that's reported every day. Now, subsequently, it's reviewed, and they take out the deaths which are what we call incidental. So the reporting requirement was death within 28 days of a positive test. Now, 20% of those people did not die of or with COVID and should be removed. So take out 20%.
Okay.
After that, about 25% had some other underlying illness, but COVID-19 contributed to their death.
Sure.
So if they didn't have COVID, they wouldn't have died at that point.
Yeah, gotcha.
And 50% are caused by COVID-19 infection directly. So the true number, if you take out 20%, it's more like 30 a day at the moment. Is the true death toll from COVID-19. But you multiply that by 365,
10,000.
It's moving into, the total number of people dying every year in New Zealand is about 35,000 a year.
Yeah, wow.
So we don't want to add 10,000 to that.
Yeah.
We don't want to add 500 as influenza. We thought that's our biggest infectious disease killer at the moment, is 500 deaths a year from influenza. COVID-19 is almost an order of magnitude more than that at the moment. So we really don't want it. And we can turn that tap down with the things we've been talking about.
From the University of Otago, Wellington, Department of Public Health, Professor Michael Baker. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. I know there was a bit of a connection for us to get together, but I very much enjoyed that we finally connected. And thank you for answering all of my ridiculous questions. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Pat. No, great questions. Thank you.